I graduated from University of Virginia in 1951. At that time, the first of the English sports cars were becoming evident on these shores, the MGs and the Jaguars. I had a friend who had an MG. I thought it was a wonderful, most wonderful thing I'd ever laid eyes upon. And my very generous parents decided that they would give me an MG as my college graduation gift. So my father and I got on the train in Easton and went to New York by train and drove the new MG home. This was my gift at the start of my senior year so that I could enjoy it before going to Korea. So I had the MG my last year at Virginia. At the same time, my father, as an attorney, was involved in a divorce case involving a Talbot County family that owned a Duesenberg, a great rarity. You should understand that the Duesenberg was the super car of its time. They built 480 of them, of which only 36 were supercharged cars. The supercharged cars boasted 360 horsepower. The next most powerful American car was Chrysler with 90. A Chrysler cost $1,000. When you went to buy a Duesenberg, you bought chassis only for $10,000, and then you commissioned a body to be built on the chassis. It was a supercar of the super rich with super performance to match. Enormous power, designed to do 90 in second gear, 120 in top. My father was also interested in cars. He had a 12-cylinder Packard, which he said could pass any car on the road except a filling station. That was his description. In 1951 or 2, there was a book published on Duesenberg. I received a copy, became infatuated, together with my father's story about the local Duesenberg. And so when I was in law school, the marketplace for unusual cars was the Sunday New York Times. There were virtually no car magazines at that time. So one Sunday morning in my last year at Harvard, there appeared an ad in the Sunday Times of a supercharged Duesenberg Roadster right around the corner in North Andover, of all places, laid in my lap. So I jumped in the MG, went to see it, was smitten. The price was $2,200. I talked the gentleman down to $2,000. Which about the price of a new Ford or Chevrolet. It was not outrageous. And summoning up all my courage, I called my father on the telephone and told him of this extraordinary opportunity that just happened to offer itself on my doorstep. And wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if he were to consider a Duesenberg as my law school graduation present? And my dear father agreed to do that. And so I became a Duesenberg owner in 1953. As of this date, I am the oldest Duesenberg owner in the collector car field in the world. And I've owned Bugatti for over 60 years. Yeah. I've owned the Duesenberg over 70 years. Duesenberg was an all-American, heavy-duty, big, strong, brawny, high-speed beast of the road. Bugatti, on the other hand, was a high-speed beast of the road to European tastes. Lighter, delicate, agile, suitable for the European market, where Duesenberg was suitable for the American market, though both cars were sold and on both continents, for that matter. There were a number of Duesenbergs that were especially bodied in Europe.
Was it hard for you to fall in love with Bugatti after having such a long affair with Duesenberg?
No, not at all. Duesenberg was my first love, and I was aware there were other cars in the world. And of course, Bugatti was a legendary figure. I knew little about it. There was a book written called Kings of the Road by a man by the name of Purdy, who had a chapter on each of the major automobile books, major automobile makes, including Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Hispano Suiza, Sottofrascini, Bugatti, Stutz, etc., etc. And I read the book assiduously, and Bugatti was a very, very romantic figure. It was the most artistic of all cars. And I inquired about the possibility of acquiring a Bugatti. I had a dealer friend in New York who said he could get one from Europe. And he furnished me with pictures of a very pretty two-passenger coupe called an Adelante coupe. Adelante named for the legendary Grecian huntress who was so swift of foot that she challenged all her suitors to a foot race. Aphrodite intervened with the golden apples, you may remember.
Yeah.
Depends upon how good your Greek mythology is.
That's pretty weak.
The pictures were very intriguing, a very pretty model. I knew the Adelante was a especially attractive two-passenger, very racy-looking car. $1,200. I bought it sight unseen. It was shipped before there were shipboard containers. This was in the 60s.
Oh.
So the boat was driven on the freighter and driven off the freighter. I was advised it was on the dock in Brooklyn. My father and I and two friends went to New York in the family station wagon with a can of gas, can of water, new battery, got in the car, installed the battery, poured in the gas, it started up, drove it straight home to Maryland. Fools rush in. We stopped at every stopping place on the Jersey Turnpike to replenish the water. A water pump leaked like crazy.
Oh.
All Bugatti water pumps leak. That's a matter of faith.
Oh.
But it drove beautifully. I remember going through the Holland Tunnel without any muffler on it. Sounded glorious. And drove beautifully. I'd never driven a right-hand drive car before, nor a left-hand shift before.
Oh,
but
boy.
Fools rush in, and I did it, and we got home safe and sound.
What was it about the Bugatti design that is a class apart? I mean, it is such an art object.
Well, it was not only an artistic machine, but it was a high-performance machine. The Type 57 Bugatti, of which I purchased an example, had an engine very similar to Duesenberg. That is, they were both double overhead cam, straight 8 engines, racing practice.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bugatti had a displacement of 3.3 liters. The Duesenberg had exactly twice that, 7 liters. But same inherent principles, build them to the very highest standard, build them to high performance, make them things of art in the process. And the Duesenberg was art according to the American idiom, and the Bugatti was the more refined, more aesthetic art of the European idiom. The Bugatti was much lighter handling. The Duesenberg, I was young and strong, and I managed.
No parallel parking.
Well, that was part of the game. They were not nearly as hard to steer as the Sottofrascini. I had a couple of Asadas along the way. They were immensely hard to steer, all low mileage because nobody could drive them very far. But the Duesenberg, while heavy on a truck, was agile at speeds, steered lightly. It had power brakes. It was very responsive to acceleration and deceleration, and excellent headlights and excellent steering, but heavy. The Bugatti was much lighter in weight. The whole shooting match was much lighter, smaller and lighter and shorter. The Bugattis were built in several different varieties, including out-and-out racing cars as well as giant supercars. They built 6 Bugatti Royales, which were enormous cars of 14-liter capacity. The display of the Bugattis at the Art Museum was not my idea. This was the idea of my good friend Warren Cox, who was a distinguished architect residing near Chestertown. Warren got the idea that the cars of the 30s were inherently things of beauty and were in effect rolling art. He's not the first man to have thought so. The New York Museum of Modern Art displayed classic cars in the 60s, I guess it was. Anyhow, he conceived of the idea of displaying some of my cars in this museum. And the idea was discussed and bruited about, and it was determined that the big cars were too big and heavy to get in. So we knew that Bugatti had been displayed in other museums together with artifacts built by other members of the Bugatti family. That is Carlo, who did furniture and silver, and Rembrandt Bugatti, who did the sculpture. So after much discussion, it was decided generally that was a good idea and the museum would go forward. A new lady curator appeared on the scene something over a year ago in the name of Lee Glazer, who had been with the Smithsonian, among other places, and was a lady of great ability and distinction. And she seized upon the opportunity to do something with the idea, and it got going on it immediately. Went to Florida, where she knew there was a collection of Rembrandt Bugatti sculpture. This collection was about to be exported to Switzerland. She established good rapport with the owners and arranged to borrow 9 of the sculptures before they were exported. And so with that start, she then communicated with other museums and arranged to borrow pieces of sculpture, of furniture rather, from museums having Carlo's work. And then she had our cars. I say our cars. They're no longer my cars. I gave everything I had, including the cars, to my 2 sons some years ago.
I see.
So I have a paternal, non-legal interest in the cars. My boys own them. They were somewhat reluctant to think it was a good idea because we have maintained a fairly low overview as far as the public is concerned. And while we've shown our cars at concours d'elegance across the country, they've not been widely known to the community. So my sons were somewhat sensitive to the idea of making a public spectacle, as it were, but came to the view that it was a good thing for the museum, it was a good thing for the community. I'm very fortunate in having some degree of inherent mechanical ability. And I not only put together a Duesenberg from parts, but I built up a Bugatti from parts.
That's right.
The Atlantic Bugatti, which you see in the room, together with the first Bugatti, which was the Adelante. They called it the Atlantic, apparently in a bid for international recognition, if you will. In any case, the Atlantic was a very, very special car designed originally to be built in magnesium for extra light. Magnesium cannot be welded. It will burn, as you know. So the concept was to build the body, that is the fuselage, if you will, in two halves and rivet the two halves together on the center line, thus obviating the need for welding. The factory ended up building 4 cars. They determined that magnesium was too difficult to work, and so they gave up on the magnesium idea and built the 4 cars of aluminum. But they retained the riveted fin down the top of the fuselage as a styling feature. And the fenders also have the same riveted fin. A great eye catcher.
It was.
The 4 cars were duly built in aluminum. One has vanished. There's no knowledge of where it might be. Some feel that it was probably stored away in Germany during World War II or in Europe somewhere. I have read elsewhere where it was exported to India and may be in India to this date. In any event, it remains undiscovered and is probably, is certainly the most valuable vintage car in the world.
Yes.
They built 3 cars. That leaves 3 cars. One car was demolished in a railroad accident. The driver was, at the time, accompanied, of course, by his French mistress. If you're going to have a railroad accident in an Atlantic, you need a French mistress to complete the picture. He complied. So that car was demolished, though later rebuilt after a fashion of many bits and pieces. That leaves two complete cars. One was owned and held in the Peter Mullen collection in California. It was co-owned with one other gentleman. It is still in California. Its current status is uncertain. It's in storage. The 4th car is owned by Ralph Lauren. And he has it and will continue to have it for the indefinite future.
Do you feel like there's a future for these kind of car exhibitions?
There is a future for the very best. There were some mediocre Bugattis, some underpowered little passenger cars, which were cute and pretty, but not particularly wonderful. And those cars do not have great value. But the best cars, the best Bugattis, the best racing cars, the best passenger cars have very high value and will continue to have.